Well, the idea of the universe is conscious is the opposite of the idea that most of us have been educated to believe. Those of us who've had a scientific education will have been taught that the universe is made of inanimate matter. The whole cosmos has no mind, no purpose, no consciousness. It's just matter or physical systems following mathematical laws. That's all there is to it. It goes on automatically without intelligence or mind. So the idea that the whole universe might be conscious is the exact opposite of what we've been taught. But the reason we have to debate is precisely because we have been taught that. That picture of physics that we have in institutional science has no place whatever for consciousness. It's ignored completely. And when physicists talk about a theory of everything, they mean a theory of everything except consciousness. Now, most scientists would prefer to ignore consciousness completely because it doesn't fit in. But there are some people who say, well, actually, consciousness is simply a fact of nature. We are conscious. How do you explain that in a universe that's supposed to be completely unconscious? And that has given rise to what is now called the hard problem of consciousness in the philosophy of mind. We ought not to be conscious from a scientific point of view. So some philosophers of mind have spent their entire careers trying to prove that we're not conscious and that we have no free will. So we couldn't possibly choose to accept their arguments because we have no free will with which to accept them. Anyway, they've made whole careers out of this. Other philosophers say that consciousness is nothing but an epiphenomenon, a product of brain activity, which doesn't do anything, to which other philosophers and scientists object, well, why has it evolved then? If it doesn't do anything, why is it there? And other philosophers have tried to show that consciousness is an illusion produced by brain activity, but their critics have pointed out that illusion is itself a mode of consciousness, so it doesn't really explain it. And so these arguments have gone round and round in circles for decades, and that's why it's called the hard problem of consciousness. Some philosophers, including Philip Goff, have argued that they can solve the hard problem by saying, well, there's a little bit of consciousness even in electrons and atoms. And if we say that there's a bit of consciousness in very simple material systems, then when we get up to a complex system like the brain, it's not really a problem. It's a difference of degree, but not a difference of kind. So panpsychism, the idea that psyche or mind is present throughout nature, has become surprisingly influential within the academic, philosophical, and scientific worlds. The main reason for its popularity is because people think it does provide a solution or a potential solution to the hard problem of consciousness. It's much easier to explain consciousness if it's already there in many other parts of nature than if it suddenly pops into existence in human brains and the brains of other animals from nowhere. So that's the main reason for people advocating panpsychism, to solve the hard problem. But when they've got to the human brain, they usually leave off at that point, stop there. But one of the reasons I wrote my paper, Is the Sun Conscious?, is that if you take panpsychism seriously, pan means everything, then why stop at the human brain? Why not larger systems like the sun? I started thinking about the consciousness of the sun, partly because I spent 7 years living in India. When I was living in India, I learned a yoga exercise that probably some of you do, called Surya Namaskar. It's a prostration to the sun. I do it every morning. I've done it every morning for nearly 50 years. And it's the reason that it's called Surya Namaskar. Surya means the sun. And Indians prostrate to the sun every morning, or many Indians do, because the sun is a god. It's a source of consciousness and divine light. One of the most common prayers in the Hindu tradition is the Gayatri mantra, which is almost as common as the Lord's Prayer in Christianity. And it's an invocation for the glorious divine light of the sun to illuminate our meditation. It's addressed to the sun. So the Indians treat the sun not as a dead hydrogen bomb in the sky that's just carrying out physical processes, but as a divine being or a portal of the divine light into the world. And they're not alone. The ancient Greeks thought that the sun was a god, or the Japanese think the sun's a goddess. Here in Europe, our ancestors thought of the sun as a god or a goddess. In Southern Europe, the sun was a god. In Northern Europe, the sun was a goddess. That's why in French, the sun is le soleil, it's masculine, and the moon is la lune, it's feminine. Whereas in German and in Germanic languages, the sun is feminine, die Sonne, and the moon is masculine, der Mond. These are opposite mythological systems. I think, incidentally, that this is one reason for the English language having the form it does, because English is really a hybrid of French and German, or French-type and German-type languages. The Anglo-Saxons spoke Germanic language. The Norman conquerors, who were, of course, basically Norwegians and Danes living in France, they spoke French. And so when these two languages merged in England, what did they do with the gender of the sun and the moon? One not said it's masculine, the other said it's feminine. It was the primal English compromise. They just neutralized almost the entire language, which is one reason English people find it so hard, apart from laziness, to learn other languages, because they can't understand why words should have genders. So anyway, the sun is treated as alive and conscious, and it was thought to be alive and conscious by the ancient Greeks, and in the philosophy of the Middle Ages, influenced by Aristotle, refined by St. Thomas Aquinas, the whole Earth was considered to be alive. The suns, planets, and stars were considered to be living beings, with each guided by its own angelic intelligence. When they looked up at the sky, they saw the sky as being full of intelligence and life, not some empty space with celestial bodies floating around according to mathematical laws. The scientific revolution of the 17th century was a revolution precisely because it said nature is dead, inanimate, and mechanical. It's not alive, as everyone has always thought before, in all parts of the world. The sun and the planets are not living beings, even though we still call them by the names of gods and goddesses, Mars, Venus, Mercury, and so on. They're nothing but inanimate objects. So we've got so used to thinking of consciousness as confined to brains, the cerebrocentric view of consciousness, that it's hard for us to expand our thinking in these unfamiliar directions. But when I started thinking about the possibility that the sun might actually be conscious, I started thinking about, well, what would the interface between the physical body of the sun and its consciousness be? Well, that interface is most likely to be the electromagnetic field. The sun has very complex electromagnetic patterns and vibratory patterns of activity. It has an 11-year cycle, which reaches its peak. At the moment, it's at a peak right now. There was a major coronal mass ejection about 2 weeks ago. It's in a peak of its activity right now. And these 11-year cycles are the long cycles. Every 11 years, the north magnetic pole of the sun becomes the south magnetic pole. The entire magnetic polarity of the sun reverses. And during the 11-year cycle, there's a whole series of sunspots and rhythms of activity, patterns of electrical activity and seismic activity. The whole Earth, the sun is like a gong. It's vibrating, as well as having all these changing electric fields. And I think these electric fields could easily be the interface with its mind. After all, when you look at neurophysiology and most people's theories about how our brains are related to our mental activity, the interface is the electromagnetic activity of the brain. Alpha rhythms, theta rhythms, it's been known for decades that our mental states are correlated with vibratory field-like patterns of activity in our brains based on electrical impulses in nerves. So the interface is the electric field, and some philosophers and philosophers of mind and scientists think that the electromagnetic field is the basis of our consciousness. I think it's the interface with our minds, it's the way they interact with the brain, but some actually identify consciousness with the electromagnetic field. I'm talking, for example, of the electromagnetic field theory of consciousness, which several philosophers and neuroscientists have proposed. So, if it's fairly widely discussed about human brains that the electromagnetic field's the interface, why not the sun? It's got much more complex electromagnetic fields than our brains, and much bigger, of course. These fields extend out through the entire solar system, which you could think of as the body of the sun. The solar wind of charged particles flows out from the sun all the time, and when it hits the Earth's magnetosphere, it causes changes in the whole ionic and electrical structure of the Earth, which is why you get the northern lights. In the recent eruptions on the sun, the northern lights could even be seen as far south as London. I mean, they're more familiar in this part of the world than they are in Britain. But the northern lights change according to the activity of the sun. And the activity of the sun affects life on Earth, which is why they have space weather forecasts, because there's a big effect of these solar flares on electrical transmissions and radio and so forth. So I think that there's no problem in thinking about the possible interface between the sun's body and its mind, because the electromagnetic field provides a natural way of thinking about that. Also, a way in which it would be able to feel what's happening through the whole solar system through its electromagnetic field, which could be like a sense organ. We know that some animals use the electromagnetic field as a sense organ, for example, the electric eel. I think the sun's doing something rather similar, knowing what's going on. We're all in the electromagnetic field of the sun right now, on this side of the room, rather more than on that side of the room. But within the electromagnetic field of the sun could be omniscient. It could know exactly what's happening in the light that emanates from it and the electrical fields that permeate the Earth and the entire solar system. Well, if the sun is conscious, then what does it think about? We can't, of course, ask it, or at least not yet, but we can work on certain general principles. And for me, the most interesting lead philosophically on this comes from the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead, who in the first half of the 20th century developed a philosophy of organism, treating nature and the whole of nature as an organism, not as a machine. And his theory of consciousness was that consciousness is to do with the realm of the possible. Our minds are concerned with possibilities. That's why mental things are not the same as physical things, because they're about possibilities. And the role of consciousness is to choose among possible actions. This, again, was something that also suggested by the French philosopher Henri Bergson, who thought that our perceptions are potential actions, and we choose among possibilities through our conscious life. So if that applies to the sun, the solar mind would be concerned with choosing among possible actions. Now, what possible actions could it choose? Well, I think one action it could choose is where to fire off solar flares. And coronal mass ejections, it fires off these enormous energy bursts. And if they're pointed at the Earth, they can have very serious effects. If they're pointed away from the Earth, they have different effects. If they're pointed at other planets, they'd affect those planets. So the sun may be able to regulate the solar system, partly through coronal mass ejections and solar flares. Another role of the mind of the sun might be in dealing with its peer group, which are other stars within the galaxy. And it may be that stars communicate with each other, possibly through electromagnetic, most likely through electromagnetic impulses or patterns. But the idea that they're all completely separate seems to me very unlikely. In fact, we know that the stars within the galaxy are linked through the galactic wind. The arms of our spiral galaxy have huge surges of ionized plasma and electrical currents and magnetic fields going through them. The magnetosphere of the Earth bends in response to the solar wind, but the heliosphere, the entire electromagnetic envelope of the whole solar system, is shaped by the galactic wind, which blows past it all the time. And what if other stars are also conscious? If the sun's conscious, we'd expect other stars to be conscious. And if other stars are conscious, what about larger systems like galaxies? What if the entire galaxy has a mind, the galactic mind? Well, why not? I mean, the stars and solar systems might be like cells in the body of the galaxy. And the galactic mind may be modulating all the activities within the galaxy. There's something a bit like the galactic brain, a giant black hole at the center of the galaxy from which enormous energy pours out through these solar arms, through the galactic arms. So the galactic mind may be coordinating the whole body of the galaxy. Other galaxies may have galactic minds. And galactic minds may be joined up through what's called the cosmic web. It's now known that there are plasma bridges between galaxies through which huge electric currents pass with magnetic field lines millions of light years long. The entire universe is wired up together. These galaxies in the cosmic web look a bit, when you see pictures of this, they look a bit like neural cells in networks, or as our son Merlin points out, like mycelial networks of fungal mycorrhizae. They're all network systems joined up together. And that, I believe, could be the electric basis of the cosmic mind. I'm not alone in suggesting that stars are conscious. I mean, in the past, almost everyone believed that. But in current science, there are a couple of people I might mention. One is Greg Matloff, who is an American physicist, who is the author of the volitional star hypothesis. Matloff is very critical of contemporary cosmology, which, as many of you will know, now has about 95% of reality as utterly unknown to us. Dark matter and dark energy have been postulated to make up 95% of the whole universe. The regular matter and energy we learn about in physics lessons at school and university is only 5% of what's supposed to be there. And they postulated there's about 5 times as much matter in the galaxies that's invisible and so far undetectable. Why do they think it's there? Well, because galaxies don't behave as they should do if they were just obeying regular gravitation. Stars have orbits that are too fast, galaxies attract each other too much. So in order to make the equations balance, they just add in arbitrary amounts of dark energy so they can make all the sums add up. They titrate in the exact amount they need to make everything fit. And it's very easy to do mathematical equations if you can introduce an unknown quantity for which there's no independent evidence to make all your sums explain the facts. They do explain the facts, but at the price of inventing a huge amount of dark matter. Having invented all this dark matter, the universe should then have had so much more gravitational pull that it was supposed to be slowing down as it expanded. It was then supposed to start contracting until about 1998. Cosmologists thought the universe would slow down, start contracting, contract faster and faster till it all ended in tears and the opposite of the Big Bang known in the trade as the Big Crunch. But it turned out in 1998 that actually the universe is expanding faster and faster as time goes on. So they had to invent dark energy to explain this expansion. So what Greg Matloff points out is that all of this comes about because they assume that everything that governs the galaxy is just gravity. He thinks that the stars are autonomous, just like the cells in an embryo they can move around and take up the right place without having embryonic dark matter pulling them gravitationally to the right place to be an eye or a liver. They move of their own accord and take up their right place. He thinks that stars can propel themselves by jet propulsion, as it were, by shooting out solar flares more in one direction than another, and take up their right position within the galaxy. That galaxies are self-organizing because the stars are alive and conscious. It's a completely different theory from the dark matter theory. Now, you could say it's not testable, but you could say that of dark matter as well, since all attempts to test it have so far failed. So obviously we're in a realm of speculation here, but compared with modern cosmology, this is not a unique situation. I mean, modern cosmology is full of speculation, dark matter, dark energy, trillions, quadrillions of parallel universes in the multiverse hypothesis with no evidence at all. So we're entirely in the realm of speculation, constrained by some facts, but not that many. Another idea about stars comes from the Belgian philosopher Clément Vidal. And Clément Vidal has proposed what he calls the stellivore hypothesis. He points out that most stars in our galaxy are double stars. They're pairs of stars that rotate around each other. The best-known example is Sirius, the dog star. The star we see in the sky as the dog star is a bright star, but it has a dark companion, and they revolve around each other. The dark companion star used to be bigger and brighter than the one we now identify as Sirius, that we see in the sky. And Clément Vidal argues that stars, when they're running out of energy, move around in the sky, being self-propelled, till they find a star that's full of energy, go into a double orbit around it and suck the gas and energy and matter out of it. That's what is actually, everyone agrees that's happened in the case of the Sirius pair. It's normally just treated as just a simple fact. Clément Vidal thinks it's going on all the time. Luckily, our own sun is still a single sun, and no predators on the horizon at the moment. So it's one of the things we can be thankful for. Well, if we have this idea that the entire universe is conscious, we then run into a whole series of other questions. I mean, obviously, we're into the realm of speculation, as I said, but we can get even further in. I mean, some people won't like this, I know, but if the whole universe is conscious, then what does that tell us about the greater picture? Is the conscious universe all there is? If so, then we'd have really basically a kind of pantheism. Pantheism is the doctrine that the whole of nature is conscious, has a mind and a body. And the famous philosopher Spinoza in the 17th century was the prototypic pantheist. He said, he talked of God or nature. God is the mind of nature, nature is the body of God. The whole universe is a living organism. It's God, it's also nature, it's alive, it's permeated by consciousness. And that is a form of pantheism. God is everything. But there's another position, another, I think, more interesting theological position, which is closer to that of some of the more deep theological theories over the ages in all traditions, Christian, Hindu, and other traditions too, which is now called panentheism. God is in nature, but nature is in God as well. Just like our minds are in our bodies, our minds permeate our bodies. We can feel pain in different parts of the body. The mind permeates the whole body. But our minds, our bodies are also in our minds, because we can see our body, as it were, from outside in a mirror, and just by looking at it, our minds can transcend our immediate bodily concerns. And panentheism is rather like that the mind of the whole cosmos is within a greater mind which transcends the cosmos itself. Panentheism. So this also takes us to a philosophical tradition that was very well developed here in Europe, among the ancient Greeks and in the Middle Ages. Plato talked in terms of the world soul. The demiurge, there was a kind of mind that created the world soul, and the whole world was cosmic consciousness of the whole world. The soul of the whole world underlay the souls of everything within it. This was taken further by the Neoplatonic philosopher Plotinus, writing in North Africa. And Plotinus said that the world soul gives rise to the souls of all the things within it, of the stars, the planets, the animals, the plants, human minds. These are all derived from this ultimate consciousness of the world soul. But that itself is not ultimate because it came from a greater source of consciousness in the first place. So you see, when we're now in an area of debate which reconnects us with this very rich philosophical tradition. And Philip Goff's book, which he would have told you about if he'd been here, his latest book is called Why? The Purpose of the Universe. And in his book, he's arguing for what he calls cosmo-panpsychism, that the whole universe is conscious and has a purpose. He's saying something rather similar to what I'm saying, but he's got there, starting with philosophy, through a series of philosophical arguments. I'm coming at this more as a scientist, but he's ended up with a very similar kind of conclusion. He's a quite influential philosopher, and this is now, surprisingly, a matter of common debate. I mean, this is something which a lot of people are talking about. And who would have thought it 10 or 20 years ago, when it seemed so certain that the universe was purposeless, totally unconscious, the only consciousness was on this planet, and then confined to human brains and maybe the brains of a few higher animals. After all, we inherited from the 17th century mechanistic revolution the idea that we're the only conscious beings. Descartes famously thought that animals were machines and plants are machines. And they're still treated like that in biology, molecular biology. A few weeks ago, there was a solemn declaration by a group of scientists who were saying that after many years of deliberation, they'd come to the conclusion that other animals could be conscious, cats and dogs and maybe fish and so on. Well, anyone who's kept a cat or dog doesn't need years and years of study to come to that conclusion. And so we're actually shifting our position rather interestingly at the moment. And interestingly, panpsychism, you see, is something which some atheists adopt as well. They think the best way to save the atheist point of view is to admit there's consciousness throughout nature. So we've reached a very interesting point where it's no longer one lot of narrow old school materialists and one lot of sort of wild theological speculators. There's now this whole middle ground of panpsychism and opening up questions like, are stars conscious? Is the whole universe conscious? And that's the position we're in today. And I think it's a very exciting and very interesting position to be in. It's also one, as I say, which most people would not have predicted 10 or 20 years ago. But I think we're forced to think in this way, partly because the limitations of old-style materialism are becoming clearer and clearer, partly because we're obviously living in terrible disharmony with our planet, and there's something about our philosophy of nature which underlies that, partly because we're undergoing a kind of paradigm shift to, I think, a more holistic worldview. And this is all part of that debate. Thank you.